Check, 1, 2. There we go. Hey, we got it. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ITS Georgia's March monthly meeting. Glad to have you to GDOT for hosting us this afternoon. Very much appreciate it. This afternoon, we'll be hearing from Chief Engineer Meg Pirkle. But before we get there, a few announcements. First off, thank you for everyone for registering for the 2024 membership. For those have Troy Galloway speak very quickly about membership this year.
Hey everybody, I've reached out to most companies that were memberships last year. We are still trying to update the website with Constant Contact. I found out how to do it today. So starting next month, you will not be able to register with the membership price if you're not a 2024 member. So I'll be sending out emails to the voting members from your organization in the next week to remind you guys about registration. And there are plenty of discounts. You get a $200 discount for annual meetings for all your staff members too. So that's it.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Galloway. Also, important note with that registration, next month we will begin phasing back in our late registration fees. So if you wait until the very last minute to register for this meeting, you will notice that your fee goes up approximately $5. So for all of you that continue to register on time and way in advance, very much appreciate that. That helps our folks organize, get food ordered correctly. So thank you to that point. Next up, for those of you that are engaged in the March Madness piece, thank you for that. We have 35 participants going on, some gift cards for the winners. I'm in a really great place, number 20. So I'm looking forward to picking you guys off somehow, but I don't know how I'm going to make this happen. We do have several upcoming events that we're excited to announce for you guys. One of which being a monthly meeting up in Gwinnett County. The location is being finalized now. That'll be the 4th Friday of April. And then in May will be our training that will be on freight data that GDOT and ARC recently purchased. That training will be hosted by GDOT and will be that announcement you will be seeing here shortly. The way that we are setting that one up is it'll be a later day training and then followed by a social. So hope to have everyone there. That's a joint meeting between ITS Georgia and Georgia ITE. For those of you that are ITE members, you'll notice that registration comes from ITS Georgia, so just be on the lookout for that. Last up is that we have our annual meetings. Just as a courtesy reminder, registration is open. You'll see a preliminary schedule coming out here in the next week or so. With that as well are a few more things that are way down the line. Next year is ITS World Congress. That will be hosted right here in Atlanta. Very excited about that. Commissioner McMurray will be officially announcing that at ITSA in a few months, or excuse me, a month at the ITSA conference. And then the following year, which will put us into 2026, is the Southeast Summit. The last one we had was here in Atlanta. Next one will be in North Carolina. If you are interested in volunteering for that, there are plenty of opportunities. We would love to have you as part of our commitment for ITS Georgia. We have to provide a certain number of volunteers to make sure that we have good representation on that group. With that, I want to introduce our sponsor for the month. We want to thank Utilicom for providing our sponsorship this month. I think I saw Kelly here. No, it's Emily Dwyer. The microphone is yours.
Hey everyone, as mentioned, my name is Emily Dwyer, and I recently came on board with Utilicom as the Director of Engineering Solutions. Utilicom is proud to be sponsoring this month, especially as it's Women's History Month. So I'm going to be very quick, as Matt keeps telling everybody, be very quick. A very quick overview of what Utilicom does. So if you were at last month's meeting and you got to hear about GDOT's Wrong Way Driver project, that is just one of an endless number of examples of the solutions that Utilicom can provide to you. So our goal is to get out there, be able to provide solutions to our customers, everything from helping come up with the idea and helping brainstorm on a problem that you may have, following that through to the deployment, installation, and integration. So in a nutshell, that's us. One more thing before Matt kicks me off the mic. We are currently doing some engagement on our social media. So if you are interested in celebrating Deep Dish Pizza Day, which is April 5th, get on our social media accounts. If you post a picture of yourself with any Utilicom swag on any of our social media accounts, you're entered for a drawing for a solo pizza stove with the stand, the accessories, the whole gambit. So get on there, go ahead and get your pictures. If for some reason you don't have Utilicom swag, I have brought a few hats with me, so find me after the meeting and you can come take a picture with a hat and you'll be able to submit to win. So thanks.
Appreciate it. Appreciate that, Emily. And again, thank you to all of our sponsors every month. We wouldn't be able to do this without their wonderful support. And with that, allow me to introduce Chief Engineer Meg Pirkle. Meg Pirkle, of course, like I just said, is the Chief Engineer of the Georgia Department of Transportation, a position she has had since January 2015. As Chief Engineer, she oversees engineering, construction, and project management for the department's $2.5 billion, that's with a B, statewide capital program. Meg also oversees the P3 program, statewide maintenance, traffic operations, and intermodal programs. Meg earned a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Vanderbilt University, a master's degree in civil engineering from Georgia Tech, and is a registered professional engineer. Meg, I will hand it to you for your presentation.
This is where I always have to do presentations to the board, so it's a little weird. I'll put this over here. But good morning. It's great to be here with y'all today. I guess it's after morning. Good afternoon. And it's been a while since I've had the opportunity to speak to ITS Georgia, so it's good to be with y'all today and catch up. I wanted to talk about a couple of different things. I want to give you a few updates about GDOT and our budget, because money pays for all of y'all and whatever you do. And if you're working on GDOT projects, it's always good to know. And then talk a little bit update about some of our ITS initiatives. So you're kind of getting two for the price of one here, because I also want to talk a little bit about being a woman chief engineer, because it is Women's History Month, and Mary and Caitlin asked me to talk a little bit about that, so I will. So you're getting all kind of different speeches today, but we're going to start with money. So this slide here shows, it's a busy chart. This is developed by FHWA, and it shows it's the National Highway Construction Cost Index. And basically it consists of all the cost of certain things that go into building a highway: steel, aggregate, concrete, commodities, and a few others. And then on this chart you can see it's compared to the Producer Price Index, which is just the average selling price of domestic products. The Employment Cost Index is the yellow line, so that's the average cost of employees. And the Consumer Price Index, which I think most people are familiar with, that's the blue line. And so from 2020 to 2023, the National Highway Construction Cost Index grew by 51%. And it hasn't stopped. We've just seen really huge increases in the price of the things that we put out there on the highways. But the main point of this slide is to show you that transportation project costs are really outpacing the CPI and other indices that we use for inflation. So, and these costs in fact affect our projects and how we deliver projects at GDOT. So by law, we have to have a list of projects that we're going to be working on. It's called the State Transportation Improvement Program. And by law, this has to be fiscally constrained. So you have a list of projects for the next 4 years. 4 years is also defined in law. And when things increase in price, you have to move things out of that 4-year program because it has to remain fiscally constrained. So imagine here, if you will, here we are, we're in fiscal year 24. And if you have about, if prices are up, 30 to 50%, depending on the kind of project. So if you have about a $400 million increase on your $2 billion program, say, then you've got $400 million worth of projects that you can't deliver in that year because inflation has eaten up that money. So those projects kind of roll into FY25. And there you've also got a fiscally constrained program. So then you've got to roll projects out of FY25 into FY26. But all the projects in FY25 are also seeing cost increase and inflation, plus you're adding new projects. So it kind of builds over time until by the end of the 4-year program, you may be moving out about $1 billion worth of projects. And that's exactly where we are this year. I think I have the total in here. 183 projects shift for about $998 million. So that's the real impact of what we're seeing in our cost increases. And I know that this group doesn't do resurfacing and maintenance so much, but this is just indicative of sort of what it looks like across the board for all of our programs. If you look here, you can see that in FY21 and FY22, we did about close to 1,000 centerline miles of paving for about a $380 million budget. And so here we are in FY24, we did less than half that for pretty close to the same budget. So we're just not getting the same bang for our buck for the money that we do have. And that happens with all of our projects. You know, you just don't get to do as much as you used to. But the good news is we did get some money from the state government. So in our amended budget for fiscal year 24, the state, Governor Kemp and the legislature were very good to us. They gave us $1.5 billion. And about $100 million of that is going towards airports. About $250 million of that will go to local governments for their roads. But a huge chunk of it, a little over $1 billion of it, will go to capital projects. And so the Office of Planning is responsible for programming those funds and deciding what the money is going to be spent on. But a good chunk of it is going to go towards keeping those projects in the program that we're going to roll out. But then there will also be some moving towards new projects, so we'll have some new PE coming out, hopefully. And any improvements that are on our interstates, you can certainly be sure will have some kind of ITS components. And so we're evaluating now what those projects are going to be, but be looking for some new stuff happening in Georgia with this money. And it's great news because it'd be awful to have to move out that many projects. So I just wanted y'all to have a perspective on how we manage our program of projects and react to inflation. So talk a little bit about ITS. So, and when I was putting this presentation together, I asked Alan Davis, I'm like, don't these people already know everything we're doing in ITS? And he's like, don't assume that. So I'm going to tell you some things. Maybe some of you know this, maybe some of you don't. But ITS and operations are, as you know, truly essential elements of the work that we do, and it's vital to how we operate and maintain our transportation system. So whether it's at the TMC or the men and women of HERO who are out there every day being very brave on the highways, or the tools we use to reduce fatalities and serious injury crashes on our roadways, the technology we use that many of you in the room represent, as well as the people in this room that help us accomplish our goals to serving the state and its citizens. So on our interstate system alone today, there are over 1,200 CCTV cameras, 2,100 video and radar traffic sensors, 228 dynamic message signs, almost 400 centerline miles of fiber optic cable, and even more of these elements are on the arterial system off the interstate. We also employ advanced solutions like automated incident detection, partnerships to expand communication to directly to drivers, and innovative contract mechanisms that provide device uptime levels at 99% consistently. For over 30 years now, we've worked together to build out these technologies and tools to support the transportation needs of a very much growing state. And much of this work has been on the leading edge or even the bleeding edge, and it has yielded tremendous success in operating our transportation system. But this is just the beginning. There's always more to come. So connected vehicles, or vehicle to everything, V2X technologies, represent a tremendous opportunity in transportation to improve safety and mobility for all. And GDOT is a leader in the deployment of V2X infrastructure. And for that, I really give credit to John Hibbard, Andrew Heath, and Alan Davis, and the great staff at Traffic Ops. And we continue to prepare the state for life-saving technologies through the delivery of a 10-year V2X roadmap. This plan will equip every intersection on state routes with V2X technology and enable interoperable signal priority and preemption applications. Through these solutions, GDOT can support partners for regional interoperable public sector fleet applications, all while preparing for private vehicles to be equipped with technology. GDOT is also embarking on another transformational effort, building out our fiber network to the entirety of the interstate system. At the forefront, GDOT has a need to deploy connected vehicle infrastructure on all of our interstates and the necessary backhaul infrastructure to support current and future safety and mobility applications. Currently, the majority of our fiber is located in Metro Atlanta. However, there is a need for traffic management throughout the entirety of the state. I mean, it's really growing, and you're seeing even traffic jams on I-16, which 30 years ago, who would have imagined that? But also, when we get blessed with something like a hurricane and everyone from Florida decides to come to Georgia, we've seen that the cellular backhaul just can't compete with the cars, with everything that's, streaming Netflix, music, and podcasts, and maybe all at the same time as they pass through Georgia. So GDOT needs to consider the long-term operations and maintenance of these critical assets. So as part of that, GDOT is engaging in an operate, maintain, commercialize, or OMC contract to accomplish this. So let me tell you a little bit about that. So the build out of the connected vehicle infrastructure on the interstates will consist of 5 design build projects. The first of these is already under construction and encompasses I-75 from the Georgia-Florida line all the way to 575 and inclusive of that. The second one has just been awarded. It represents the entirety of I-16 and I-20 from just east of Atlanta to around Madison, Georgia. The third design build project is under development and planned for advertisement in FY26. And the final 2 are programmed in FY28. And these represent over 1,400 additional centerline miles of fiber optic infrastructure and hundreds of connected vehicle roadside units. This is a generational project that will enhance GDOT's traffic management capabilities exponentially. The other aspect of this transformational work includes the Operate, Maintain, and Commercialize project, which is currently in active procurement. The RFP goes out tomorrow, and we already have the qualified shortlist. At this time, we've tried a couple of different ways to expand broadband on our interstates, but this time we really think we have it right, and it's due to a lot of great work from our staff and the operations division. But it will be a P3 procurement, which will enter into a 25-year agreement to operate and maintain the fiber network, as well as commercialize the additional conduit built out through the design builds. These programs are also part of the AASHTO Moonshot program. So AASHTO is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, and they were really looking at, what is the next big idea? We're done with the interstate system. So what is the next idea like that is like a moonshot for transportation? And I really think that, the fiber and the transportation of data is a big part of that. So this is a multi-year process that's advanced the implementation for this vision of the next era of transportation in the United States. And this project is part of that. So very exciting. Another thing that's happening here in Georgia is the Connected Vehicle Pooled Fund is going to be moving to Georgia. So some of you may be like, well, what the heck is that? So a pooled fund is when several states get together and pool our money together because we all want to support research in items that we're interested in. And connected vehicles is something that we are obviously very interested in, and we are a member of this pooled fund. And up to now, it's been managed in the state of Virginia and through, was it Virginia Tech or University of Virginia? So now it will be coming to Georgia, and GDOT will be the host state, and we'll manage the program, and we'll also do it in concert with a university here in Georgia, to be determined. But, so the mission is just to accomplish research, and up to now, this pooled fund has done a lot of research. Things like traffic management centers in a connected vehicle environment was one of their projects. Best practices for surveying and mapping roadways and intersections for connected vehicle applications. Certainly lots of research about the 5.9 gigahertz short range applications and things like that. So very excited to be taking the lead on this pooled fund for the states. So that's enough about GDOT and ITS. So when I was talking to Mary and Caitlin a little bit about what they wanted to hear, they said, ITS Georgia has been trying to have more diverse presentations and discussions at your meetings. And since it's Women's History Month, they sent me a few questions. And so I'm just going to answer the questions they sent me. And then after that, you guys can ask me questions. So one of the first things they asked me was, you know, what is it like to work your way through a male-dominated industry? And I think this room probably represents a male-dominated industry, but there are more women in here than there would have been, you know, when I started, which was 34 years ago. So, you know, I can honestly say that I realize in some industries, in some countries, and even in some jobs, you know, the struggle is real, but I've had it really great here at GDOT. I've always had very supportive management and leadership, very encouraging, who had a lot of faith in me and who trusted me to give me a project and let me figure it out and go do it. And so I've always felt like I could talk to folks at GDOT if I was having trouble. I never felt like I couldn't just express myself any way I needed to. And then that's part of the reason I've been here for 34 years, is that I've always got to work with really great people and see the difference that the work we're doing makes out there for the citizens of Georgia. So it's always been a very compelling place for me to work, and that's why I've stuck around as long as I did. Let's see, the other question they asked me was, do you think the landscape of women in engineering has changed over the course of your career? And this is funny because when I was studying at Vanderbilt, I originally was an electrical engineer, and I decided I did not really like that. So I was looking at what can I do and researching some different things. And I went to speak to the Dean of Engineering, who was the Dean of Civil Engineering. And at the time, he was an older man, Dean Thaxton, God rest his soul. And he just said, you know, women don't really go into civil engineering. You have to get out there and get dirty and get in the mud. And I was just going, this is dude for real. Like, he's really saying this to me. So, so I was like, well, you know, it looks kind of cool. I think I'll try it. But and there were 2 women in my graduating class at Vanderbilt in civil engineering. So I would say that in that aspect, things have definitely changed. I can't imagine a professor saying anything like that to a young woman who's pursuing any career right now. But you know, and back then the engineering school had urinals in the ladies' room, and they don't anymore. I visited, and it's much better. And let's see, what else? When I started at GDOT, there were a few older board members who always thought I was someone's secretary. Like, for years, this would happen. And we'd go to meetings, and they'd say, that Tom Turner is so lucky to have a great secretary like you. And Tom was my boss, and I'd worked here for a good while. And that mortified him. And so obviously he would correct them. And I was like, Tom, this doesn't reflect on you. You're my boss, you know. But so, you know, I don't think any of the men in here have ever been mistaken for someone's secretary. So, you know, I think that the landscape is definitely better. And given those little hiccups, I would say that it's good to see the change and that more women are entering the field. I spoke at a freshman class for Georgia Tech last fall, and it's introduction to civil engineering. So they're trying to introduce them to all the things civil engineers do. And I've spoken at this class a few times. They want me to talk about the I-85 bridge collapse. And the class was a pretty big class. I'd say it was probably 60, 70 people, and it was at least half women. So after the class, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe there are this many women here. And he was like, yeah, it's great. So for those of you who went to Tech, you probably can't believe there are that many women at Tech now either. So some of the older folks, that is. But so one of the other questions they asked me was, how did you approach your current position as the first woman to hold this role at GDOT as chief engineer? And I think just like any job, you don't really think about, well, I'm a man or a woman, so I'm going to do it this way. I mean, my goal was just to be a good leader. And, you know, so I thought about the things that it takes to be a good leader and what I've always appreciated in the people that I've worked for. And that's, you know, first of all, I always want to have the ability to confront my leaders and give them my honest opinion about anything. And so I want people to be able to do that to me. I want to be open and listen, and I'm always accepting of new ideas. And then sometimes I disagree with you and we move on, but I always want people to be able to approach me and talk to me about anything. And it's amazing, you know, the ideas that people have at GDOT. So if you don't welcome that and you stifle it, then we're going to miss out on so much. And I certainly feel that way about my current boss, Commissioner McMurray. We have a great relationship, and I feel like I can trust him and tell him anything. And I disagree with him about plenty of things, but you know, we come to a consensus, or he makes a decision and then we move forward. But I always have that open feeling that I can talk to him about anything. Another thing that I think I really admire in some of the leaders I've had that I've tried to do is just ask a lot of questions and be open to people asking a lot of questions. I used to work for a gentleman named Gerald Ross. Some of you may know him. And one day I asked him, I was like, after a meeting, I was like, Gerald, you always ask the best questions. You know, you always ask the question that was in my mind. He's like, I always ask the question that I'm not afraid if I look stupid if I ask it. He's like, just whatever's on your mind, just ask the question, because that's how we learn and that's how we go on. And so I've always tried to take that to heart and to be a good listener as well. I definitely think that hiring and firing decisions are the most important decisions we make every day. At least I feel that way at GDOT. You know, you have to have the right people in the right place at the right time, and sometimes those are the hardest decisions, but they are the most important decisions. I also feel like we can recover from a bad decision, but we cannot recover from indecision. So sometimes you just have to make a decision and move on. And I think John Hibbard called me out on one yesterday. He's like, we just need a decision. So yeah, we just go on. It's okay to change your mind. You can always go back and fix it. And if you make a mistake, you can apologize and move on and learn from it. So I think that organizations like this are really important. I've tried to be very involved in AASHTO and NCHRP. I'm still involved at Georgia Tech. And just, you know, always learning and growing and talking to each other and finding out what we can learn from each other. I think that's very important as well. And of course, a sense of humor. I think that's the most important qualification for any employee. But certainly when you have a job like this where there are some really serious things we deal with and some very consequential decisions we make. And, you know, you could be worried all day long if you let yourself. So you really just have to have a sense of humor, enjoy it, have fun with your employees, and, you know, have joy in your work. Every day isn't joyful, but I definitely have a lot of joy in my work and in what we do as a department, and it brings me a lot of satisfaction. So, I don't know what the time is. You guys can read that. What does it say? Okay. So, I'm happy to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. You can ask me anything about GDOT or what we're doing or why we do it this way, or you can ask me about myself or decisions I've made, and I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah.
So thanks, Meg. It was very insightful, both from GDOT and your personal perspective. I have a question going back to the presentation. You mentioned that the pooled fund study will be moving its support from, or sponsorship from Virginia to Georgia. What's driving that, and how did Georgia get that opportunity, and what pooled fund studies are queued up for Georgia to lead moving forward?
I'm going to punt. Do you want to? I don't know all the details, so I'm going to ask John to.
So why is Georgia doing it? We stuck up our hand.
You want to come to the mic because I think it's streaming.
Okay.
Sure.
The question concerned the pooled fund study that Meg mentioned earlier, and why, perhaps, a bunch of whys. This pooled fund studies, I think typically the thought is that they would conduct some research, some studies, and then they're over. You're done, right? This thing has been going on since 2009. 2009. It has like 30 states in it. There's a lot of interest in the topic, and there's a lot of willingness to kick in your local share. Obviously, as she showed on another earlier slide, we've done a lot in the connected vehicle space. So it kind of made sense, you know? And so we find ourselves heading down that path.
But you don't have any projects selected yet for when it gets here?
No.
Okay.
But there are projects ongoing.
Gotcha. Thanks, Mike. Any other questions or? Yes, Scott?
You mentioned the 1.5 billion that they moved over. How does that happen, and where does that money come from, and what does that affect?
Sure.
From wherever it was.
That's a good question. So at GDOT, we have a pretty big budget for a state agency. And I'd say, you know, almost $2 billion of that is federal funds that we get from the federal highway and federal transit programs. And then we get about $2 billion every year from motor fuel tax, as well as the fees that people pay, $5 a night in hotels, and then there's the $200 for electric vehicles for your registration. And those are all dedicated fund sources that go to our regular budget every year. And it gets trued up based on collections. But there has been a surplus in the state budget, and this is state general funds. So this is the things that are other taxes that are collected, your state income taxes, but not the motor fuel tax. And so there was a surplus. If you look around at the other states around Georgia, almost every state in the South has had a surplus in their budget because the South is growing. People are moving here. And almost all of the states around us, their DOTs have been getting infusions of cash from that state general fund budget. Typically, in my career, we would never get state general funds at GDOT because we have a dedicated revenue stream. And the only state general funds we would get would be for our transit program, our rail program, and our aviation and ports, because those motor fuel tax can only be used on roads and bridges. And so we would get maybe about 50 to 100 million in state general funds that would go to match the federal funds for those other programs. So to get 1.5 billion in state general funds is unheard of. It's never happened before. And it's because the state has a surplus in the budget. And we're hopeful that maybe this will happen again next year. I don't know. But that's where it came from. And so it was recommended by the governor, and then it went through the legislative process, and they approved it in the amended budget for FY24.
With the suspension of the gas tax, has that affected the money you guys brought in last year? I mean, they had
No,
gas tax.
so the question is, and I should have repeated the last question, I guess people streaming have figured out by the answer by now. But anyway, so the question is, did the suspension of the gas tax affect our budget? And the answer is no. It should have, it would have, except because the state has a surplus in tax collections, the governor made us whole with the surplus. So but it's weird how they gave us that money to make us whole for the surplus. They called the state general funds motor fuel tax, so they made it motor fuel tax when they put it in our budget.
That wasn't included that 1.5 though.
That was outside of the 1.5, yes. Yeah.
Do you take into your calculations on your budgeting the amount of work that's currently out on the street? I mean, with the MMIP, I think all of our contractors are almost up to capacity, and working at a local agency, it was always fun to try to compete with you guys to get something paid. And this is going back a ways, but the Fast Forward program, when they tried to accelerate, all they found out was that the contractors didn't expand, they just charged more for the projects, and actually fewer projects kind of got done.
So for those of you online, he asked me if we consider all of the work that's out there when we're looking at our budget and putting out more work, and are we reaching a saturation point is kind of what I hear you saying. So if you remember the slide I showed, I'll go back to it, this one. So if you look at that, I mean, we're still spending the same amount of money, but we are getting a lot less work done for the money. So to say that we're getting a lot more money and it's necessarily going to be a ton more work isn't really the case, because a lot of that money is going to go to do the regular projects that we were planning on doing anyway. Occasionally we do have talks about, resources and our contractors' resources, those kind of things. If you look, we did an analysis of the capacity. So when we pre-qualify a contractor to do work for GDOT, we calculate their work capacity based on their revenue and their equipment and everything else.
And when we looked at the available capacity of our contractors, including all the things they're working on right now, now granted, we don't have in that calculation what they're doing for local governments. But there was capacity to do a lot more work in GDOT, in Georgia. And we're all struggling to get employees. That's probably the hardest thing right now is the talent. But we can't just stop work saying, oh, it's hard to hire people. You've got to hope that if you put more work out there, more people are going to come to Georgia because there's great work to do here. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's just a hard variable to try to account for.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out.
Okay.
That $2 billion in fuel taxes
Mm-hmm.
is going to go down.
Yeah.
Cafe standards kick in and increase, whether it's electric, whether it's hybrid, whether it's just more efficient internal combustion. Where do you see GDOT being able to get that shortfall?
That's a great question. So he asked, as the buying power of motor fuel tax goes down because the fleet is getting more efficient and more people are buying EVs, how will that affect our revenue stream and what are we doing about that? So first, let's talk about what we already have in place. So in Georgia, we are the only state whose motor fuel tax is indexed to the CAFE standards. So as the fleet gets more efficient, the motor fuel tax increases a little bit. And we also are one of the few states that have the $200 a year registration fee for EVs, which some of you commute really far, some not so far, but the average amount when the Transportation Funding Act of 2015 was passed, the average amount that most drivers paid in motor fuel tax a year was around $200 a year. We think it's so much, but it's really not that much. So that was to try to. Now, what that doesn't capture is the hybrid vehicles, for one thing, but they're still paying some motor fuel tax. So we do have some things in place to help manage what is going to be a decline, but we know the decline is probably coming. Georgia just participated in a mileage-based user fee pilot. It was from December to March. We haven't seen the results yet, but the Eastern Transportation Coalition, which is a coalition of all the states on the eastern seaboard, plus Tennessee, along I-95. It used to be called the I-95 Corridor Coalition. They are heading up this mileage-based user fee pilots in the eastern states, really just to see, to try to answer questions and bust myths about how people feel about that kind of tax collection, and to look at the ease of collecting the data and how do you manage that, and some of those privacy questions and all that. So we're participating in that, and my crystal ball doesn't go any further than that, but we're certainly aware and get a lot of questions from Congress about, when they're looking at the next reauthorization, which will come in 2.5 years, what they should consider for revenue sources. Obviously, we still keep going with the gas tax because that's what's working right now, but eventually it's gonna have to change.
I didn't realize you were indexed to CAFE standards. That is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was the legislature in Georgia thought of that, so it's a good deal.
From a career perspective, what were some of the decisions that you made or choices that you made and opportunities that you took over your career that really allowed you to get to this point?
Okay. So she asked me over my career, what are some of the decisions I made and choices I made that allowed me to get to this point, right? Is that, well, one is I stayed at GDOT. Just kidding, Kate. I love you. No, that's a good question. So I started in the Office of Planning, and as an engineering trainee, and working in planning, that was where my interest was coming out of school, but it was a really great introductory job because I worked with cities. I was developing their travel demand models, City of Rome, City of Columbus, a little bit Albany and Valdosta. And I would go to their planning commission meetings and present my findings and answer questions and go to public meetings. So right from the get-go, I think I had a good idea of what the most important thing GDOT does, and that is decide which projects we're going to do and defend our projects. And so that was a great experience for me. And from there, I moved over into pre-construction and worked in project scheduling and really got to learn the plan development process in that job. And I don't know why, but for some reason, I had, an opportunity to work a lot with the pre-construction director. And I did a lot of analysis, data analysis on projects for him and developing reports. And so from there, I was promoted into the assistant director of pre-construction. Now we call it director of engineering. Back then it was called director of pre-construction. And the difference between the director of pre-construction and the director of engineering is that back then the pre-construction was also over all project management. We've since separated that out. And so we have a program delivery division that has all the project managers, and then we have engineering, which is over right-of-way, environmental, and design. And so that was just a great experience because you get to see what it's like when you go visit with local governments and they're saying, where's my project? Y'all been working on this for 12 years and you keep telling me it's coming. And you have to answer those hard questions about projects and delivery, and every project has its own story, and some are just snake bit and everything that goes wrong can go wrong, and some go really well. But when you see the urgency of people in these communities who are really waiting on these important improvements, and then, and how happy they are when it's finally done. So that was great exposure as well. And then from there, I worked in finance for a while, just long enough to learn everything I needed to learn and realize I needed to get out of there. So, but I enjoyed it, and I learned a lot about how the department manages its money and how we fund projects and how we fund project overruns and all those kind of things. And after that, I moved to work for the chief engineer at the time, Gerald Ross, and I was the assistant to the chief engineer. And we had just gotten a bunch of stimulus money from the Stimulus Act back in 2009. And so he was like, I need someone to manage this program. It was a ton of reporting and just the political decisions of where do you put the stimulus money, what projects are you going to use. And the governor at the time wanted a ton of documentation and backstory on the prioritization process and why we made the decisions we made. And so I got to manage that process, and that was really cool. And then at the end, it was just like a lot of reporting, but it started out really cool, but still it was really good. And got to work with the federal government and fly to DC a few times to talk to them about this reporting system they'd put together that was just a nightmare, and to help try to improve that. And then from there, director of operations, which I think by far was the coolest job I'd had at that point, because I started in planning, and projects take 15 to 20 years. You're thinking about things 20 years or more out. And then in operations, it's like, oh my God, fix this and fix it tomorrow. So very exciting, very different, and really loved it, and worked with so many great people who really showed me a different side of the department, and it was great to be a part of that and deal with Snowmageddon and emergencies and other things like that. And then chief engineer. So I feel like I've had a lot of different jobs, even though it's all been at GDOT, a lot of different experiences. And, I think coming into this job, a lot of us tend to think, well, I don't know everything I should know. And I certainly don't. Believe me, I know a lot that I don't know. But the good thing about being a leader in any company or position is you've got great people working for you who are going to help you vet things and process things and make the right decisions. And I couldn't do anything I do without the support of everyone. So, any other questions? Yeah.
If I understood right, you're going to commercialize some of the duct space for the expansion of the
Yeah.
fiber.
Uh-huh.
That is actually something that we talked about pre-Olympic when we were first talking about TMC development and fiber space and cameras, etc. But it was shut down at that time. But I'm curious if GDOT will realize the revenues from that commercialized space.
So he asked about the commercialization of our fiber and commented on how that was an idea 30 years ago prior to the Olympics, and asked if we were going to see any revenue. So I think at a minimum, we hope to see the operation and maintenance costs totally covered. And then there is a revenue share component. I don't know exactly the details of that, but yes, we will have some revenue share. It may not all happen early on. It may be later on in the 25-year contract as they get clients and stuff. But it's interesting you say that y'all thought about that 30 years ago, because that space is what we tried to commercialize the first time we went down this path. And I think there just wasn't a lot of trust in the system that had been built 25, 30 years ago. And so we kind of hit a dead end with that. So, but here we're trying it again with new fiber. But you know, I mean, we have the right of way, so make the most of it. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the I-85 bridge collapse speaking at the Georgia Tech, and we just had similar event in Baltimore and Pittsburgh before that. And I think GDOT's investment in ITS technology and programs like SIGAS help make the system more resilient during those events. How often do other states reach out to GDOT and say, how do you do it, and what lessons do you share with them? Or even before those things happen, say contact you, what do you do to prepare for something next time?
So he asked regarding the I-85 bridge collapse and the other infrastructure tragedies that we've seen recently, and how ITS plays into the resiliency of our infrastructure. I mean, so the I-85 bridge collapse, we absolutely needed the ITS system. And that was the first time that our redundancy in our system was really, truly tested, believe it or not. I mean, it was built in place before the Olympics. And then when the I-85 bridge collapsed, you know, our trunk line is attached to that bridge. And so our system went down, and then it came back up, and it was like, yay, it worked. But certainly having that information and those communication tools in dealing with something like a huge backup like the I-85 bridge collapse, it was absolutely necessary, and you know, was so much a part of the response in the first 24 hours as well as afterwards in managing the traffic for the next 6 weeks. I remember when that happened, there had been a bridge collapse because a petroleum truck caught fire in Alabama. And the first person I heard from was the chief engineer from Alabama, who said, what do you need? What can I do? How can I help you? And so when that happened in Pennsylvania, and I think there was one in California as well, I reach out to my colleagues at those states as well and say, this is horrible. What do you need? If you look at the situations, they've all been very different. I mean, I think Pennsylvania just put a bunch of dirt on it and paved over it, and then they're going to deal with the bridge later. And certainly what happened yesterday in Maryland is just, I mean, that will bring tears to your eyes just to watch that video and imagine what's really happening. So they're going to have a much longer haul. They're not going to be able to replace that in 6 weeks, but certainly if there's, you know, at AASHTO, which is our, you know, the association of all the states, we talk about all these things and try to support each other as much as we can. I don't know how we're doing on time, but yeah.
Over the course of your career, do you have a project that you're either most proud of or have a soft spot in your heart, either for its innovation or just it's the first one you saw from creation to completion? Just, do you have a favorite?
I mean, there have been a lot, and I love them all so much. So, I mean, I guess just in reflection, I certainly recall, you know, we're building now projects that I planned when I was in planning. So it's kind of cool to see these things come across my desk, the final plan set, because, you know, you're planning for the future. So that it's not like we started PE back then, but just they finally got to where they were needed. And it's like, oh, wow. I modeled this, I planned this. So that's pretty cool. Certainly have a lot of pride in managing the stimulus program. That was a big responsibility, and a lot of meetings and fun and reporting. It was great to see us get all the money spent and to meet all the requirements that were manifold. And then of course, I didn't work on this one, but until the very end when I was actually chief engineer, but seeing the Northwest Corridor get built and open, that was an exciting project, and to see it actually happen was great. So, and a great example for how we're gonna manage the rest of our congested interstates in Atlanta. So, any other questions?
We have time for one more.
All right. Well, y'all have been great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you guys again for coming out this afternoon. That concludes our meeting today. We'll be meeting again the 4th Wednesday of April, which I don't know the specific date, but it is, you should be seeing an e-blast coming out either later today or tomorrow. If you already got ahead of the game, that e-blast went out, I believe, in February as well. So you may have already registered, so just make sure you don't double register, double pay, although I'm certainly glad to take that money from you. With that, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Drive safe and have a great rest of your day.